so many of their houses. These bundled subprime mortgages that the Pritzkers and their partners put together, how many of them failed? How do we know? What's happening?
We don't know. People can't even find their mortgages anymore. People are being foreclosed on, and they can't even find the original documentation on their mortgages because the bonds are sold over and over again, and then the bond is cut in half, and these pool of mortgages go to another bond fund. There really is a trouble trying to actually find your individual mortgage.
Now, let's talk very briefly about the Supreme Court's decision last week to let a lower court decision stand that, in essence, regarding Superior Bank, that the Pritzkers and their partners get back, are reimbursed before those depositors who lost their money, even though it was these go-go bankers, the Pritzkers and their partners, that gambled away the money.
Well, when the Pritzkers settled with the FDIC had to take over their institution. The FDIC knew they could very well suffer up to $1 billion worth of losses. So the Pritzkers said, well, we may have caused $1 billion worth of losses, but we're willing to pay about $460 million. We'll give you $100 million up front, and the balance we'll give you over 15 years at no interest. Well, 15 years at no interest really isn't $360 million. It's under $300 million because of what's called present-day value by paying it off right now. So the Pritzkers passed a cashier's check across the table to seal the deal. What wasn't really focused on at the time by the FDIC is Pritzker's partner Dworman owed the FDIC $100 million for a loan he took out and never paid back. So in essence, the Pritzkers paid off Dworman's loan, which had to be paid off anyway, and then debit Dworman's account for his share of their partnership. So the Pritzkers didn't really put up $100 million. They just paid off a loan that had to be paid off anyway. So the FDIC, in essence, really got nothing out of the deal. But a caveat was that when the FDIC sues Pritzker's auditors, Ernst & Young, the Pritzkers would get 25% of whatever the FDIC recovered from Ernst & Young. They also wanted 50% of any punitive damages, but a federal court threw that out right away, saying that was a travesty. There couldn't be punitive damages on this. These were your partners. So in essence, the FDIC is now working for the Pritzkers. And a famous Baltimore law firm was hired on contingency, so the Pritzkers didn't have to reach in their pocket on that one, to sue Ernst & Young. Ernst & Young agreed to...
So let me just help sum this up, because essentially the FDIC became the collection agency for the Pritzkers. They're taken to court, and the Pritzkers win, which means that they get their money. If any money is recovered from anybody, they get their money first. Now, let me just say that I was on the phone with the spokesperson for the campaign for Obama for president, and we went around on this a lot. And the question that he's still supposed to get back on me, and it's been quite a while now, is does Barack Obama support the decision of the court to pay back his finance chair and her partners before he gets to pay back, before these depositors who lost a good chunk of their $50 million in savings get their money back? How do we ever, isn't that the big question?
Well, yeah, and the question should be, is the mainstream media that travels with him on his plane should flat out just ask him, do you endorse your finance chairman for the subprime predatory lending creation she got, and the fact that she got paid back ahead of the uninsured depositors? So he needs to confront Penny to ask her the question, and then Penny can decide, or Brock can decide, whether or not Penny should stay on as his campaign chairman.
All right.
Go ahead.
Let me just jump in, because we're just about out of time. Did this ever rise to the level of criminal activity? Was anybody ever indicted, arrested, jailed?
There was one individual down in Indianapolis that worked for one of their mortgage regions in Indianapolis. He went to jail. I interviewed him, and he was aware of many of his fellow originators that were being investigated by the FBI. And I even talked to the FBI agent that investigated him. And as soon as the Pritzkers signed that deal, And the deal was there could be no criminal referrals made to the Justice Department after this deal was signed. At that point, all criminal investigations for the whole Pritzker operation were dropped. And unfortunately, Jason Doan down in Indianapolis, he didn't get under the wire. His friends that were waiting to be indicted, and actually the case was prepared. The FBI agent was ready to go on them, but it had to stop because part of the Pritzker deal was, for the $100 million, we want immunity from prosecution from everyone that worked with us in our deals.
Amazing. We're going to have to leave it right there. We're going to keep talking. Tim Anderson is a Chicago-based specialist in banking regulation, called by Mother Jones one of their hell raisers, and he certainly has been raising a lot of hell when it comes to very significant financial situations. We'll talk to you again soon, Tim.
Thank you.
And you're listening to Flashpoints on Pacifica Radio. My name is Dennis Bernstein. We're going to try and see if we can expand this discussion out a little bit now. We're delighted to be joined by Catherine Austin Fitts. She's a former assistant secretary with HUD under the first Bush administration and formerly a successful Wall Street banker. She was you were charged, Catherine, really under Bush, working at HUD. You were supposed to stem the flow of cash going out of the federal government and try and get some money back for the people. What happened?
Right. My job was to clean up the last housing bust. And essentially, and then when I left the administration, I started a company which was hired back in on competitive contract by the Clinton administration. So I was lead financial advisor in the Clinton administration. So I got to see both the first Bush and the Clinton. And what every team that's ever tried to reform mortgage fraud has found, because the mortgage market, Dennis, is very dependent on federal credit. It's a very socialized market. So most of the paper in the market, most mortgages are directly or indirectly guaranteed by the U.S. government. So it's very much driven by government and government policy by Washington. What most people have learned when they tried to or were given orders to reform the system was that the fraud was so deep and so vast that as a practical matter, it was impossible to build a political coalition necessary to create real reform. Let me give you an example. In 1995, one of the reforms, the first thing that happens is the secretary or the president calls you into their office and says, I want you to fix this so this can never happen again. Have you heard that before? This can never happen again. So we came up with a series of reforms, and we believed that if we implemented them, it could never happen again. And one of those reforms was audited financial statements for the U.S. government. The government did not balance its budget or its books on an accrual statement, and it didn't publish annual financial statements. So, long story short, we got a law passed requiring audited financial statements, and 5 years later, when it was supposed to be implemented in 1995, HUD couldn't produce audited financial statements, but they did produce accrual statements, and they were published. They were put up on the web, and friend of mine came to see me and said, look, I know you're very busy, but I know this mortgage broker in New York, and he's adamant he must talk to you. Now, remember, at this point, I'm lead financial advisor to HUD during the Clinton administration. So this guy comes in. I don't know him. He's a very serious guy, and he's got a stack of paper about four feet high. And this is his story. His story is that his family has been in the mortgage banking business for 3 generations, and their core competency is they have recorded and tracked every FHA mortgage issued. And at that point, it was about $350 billion outstanding on the books. And so the guy sits down and he says to me, my family's been in the business. He had a lockjaw, Long Island accent, and very serious guy. He says, my family's been in the business for 3 generations, and our core competency is we track all mortgages. And there's been a terrible mistake. He said the amount of outstanding FHA mortgages is many multiples of what is shown here in the financial statements, which has been produced by HUD, the Treasury, and Price Waterhouse. Well, Dennis, I thought the guy was nuts. I thought he was, because what he was saying was the U.S. Treasury and the Federal Reserve were engaged in securities fraud on a massive scale. And I couldn't fathom what he was saying was true. Well, later on, our company started a software tool that you and I have talked about called Community Wizard. Do you remember Community Wizard?
Mm-hmm. Vaguely.
Well, Community Wizard, two things happened. One was Community Wizard, and the other was was something on the loan sales, which I'm going to tell you about. But Community Wizard, what we would do is we would make accessible through the Internet data on all federal expenditures and credits. So, for example, you could see all the defaulted mortgages in your community. And we started to publish these maps on the Internet. For example, I've showed you the map of South Central LA where we showed all the defaulted mortgages in South Central LA. And everything went bizwhack. And the next thing you know, we were targeted by the Department of Justice. They seized our offices, seized all of our software, and kept our software and databases all under lock and key